This will be the first of 3 video lectures to introduce us to Area 2 group systems. We're transitioning from individual systems to group systems. In this first video lecture, we'll introduce groups and the group open systems model. In the second video lecture, we'll get more deeply into the group open systems model. And finally, in the third video lecture, we'll discuss group development. Groups form when 2 or more people come together and they interact to accomplish some goal. And we'll discuss that in the context of primarily police groups. And essentially we're going to view that from 2 perspectives. One is the extent to which and the reasons why people interact. And then the common goal for which those groups come together and interact. In police organizations, we look at 2 types of groups. One is a formal group, which consists of command, task, or team, and we'll discuss each of those in a little more detail. And then finally, there are informal groups, which we view as either interest groups or friendship groups. A command group is typically defined organizationally. Think of the organizational chart, which we're all familiar with. The typically pyramid, hierarchical group structure of most police organizations and most organizations in American society as well. And again, implicit in that is a chain of command, lines of authority and responsibility. And in theory, at least, subordinates report directly to one superior, where we can trace a line of authority all the way from the top, the chief of police, to any particular individual, clearly identifying the lines of authority and responsibility within the organization. There are task groups, which are where we bring people together to complete a particular task. This may be committees that we form to examine particular problems or create particular solutions to short-term problems in the organization, or perhaps more long-term considerations, like you may have a training committee whose responsibility is to come together and discuss or view training, make recommendations to training staff, to senior leaders. And again, the purpose of this group is to accomplish a particular task, and typically the members of this group come from different parts of the organization. So this task group lies across and spans the boundaries of those lines of authority that exist in the command group. But the critical point here is that it's the task that brings these people together. In relation to other functions of the organization, this group does not exist. There is a team that we often view or use the word team frequently when we might not really mean team, or it may not clearly meet the definition. But teams are typically mature groups in which there's a high degree of interdependence in achieving a goal. Now, all teams start as groups, but not all groups become teams. The most common example in police organizations would be SWAT teams. Some organizations, those are full-time assignments. Others, those are additional duty assignments, and the team comes together for a particular task, which would make it a task group. But it may be mature enough, and the level of interdependence is such that it forms a more cohesive unit than you would normally find in, let's say, a detective squad or a patrol squad. Interest groups are when people come together to accomplish some particular objective. It's usually voluntary, and it could be directed at organizational goals, or it may be personal goals. So you may have a group of officers who come together to form a softball team to represent the police department in a softball league. You may have officers who come together for a police athletic league to become more involved in the community, provide recreational resources or outlets for youths in the community. So this is an interest group, and typically these things, while usually associated with the organization, aren't necessarily a part of a formal group in the organization. There are, of course, friendship groups that are social in nature and typically exist for their own sake. There may be a group of officers who like to golf. There may be a group of officers who like to ride bicycles, a group of officers who like to go to the gym at a particular time, maybe before or after a shift. So you find social groups forming, and this is common in any organization. And individuals may belong to many number of friendship groups, and there'll be some overlap in these. That looks pretty intimidating, but this is the open systems model of groups. Recall that systems thinking is one of our underlying structures in this course. And in this we view groups as open systems where there are inputs, there are throughputs, and there are outputs. And we'll look at the inputs, the personal characteristics that are inputs into groups, the situational characteristics. Then we'll examine the throughputs in terms of group structural dimensions, in other words, those dimensions related to the group itself. And then we'll also look at group processes. And then finally we'll look at the outputs of groups. Some of the outputs are effects on the individual, effects on the group, and effects on organizational performance. And we'll get in more depth in that discussion in the video in part 2.